A wheel came off a service van on the interstate, and the repair, the tow, and the 2 days that van sat still cost the shop more than every torque wrench on my bench put together. The wrench that set those lug nuts was not the cheap one. It was the expensive one, and it had been dropped off a bumper 4 months earlier and put straight back in the drawer. Every buyer believes the money in a torque wrench buys accuracy. It does not. The money buys a better ratchet head, a nicer case, and a name on the handle. Accuracy is a thing the tool loses over time no matter what it costs, and nobody selling you one has any reason to mention that. By the end of this, you will be able to pick up a torque wrench in a store, spend about 30 seconds with it, and know whether it is worth carrying to the register. You will know which single feature actually predicts whether it will still be honest in 3 years, which feature is pure showroom, and where the cheap tool genuinely beats the expensive one instead of just costing less. There are 6 things I check. I am holding the 6th back on purpose, because it is the one that decides it, and it will not make sense until the other 5 are in your hands. It is also the only one of the 6 that has anything to do with why a wheel ends up in a ditch. 40 years buying tools for a commercial fleet shop. 60 mechanics on the floor across 2 shifts, and not one of them owned the tools they were using, which is the part that changes everything. A man is careful with his own ratchet. He is not careful with the shop's. I signed for those tools, and every one that failed came back across my desk with a work order attached explaining what it took out with it. That is a different education than reviewing a tool. I never once got to see a wrench on the day it was new and impressive. I saw them at 18 months, at 4 years, and at the moment they let go. And I saw which names were still working and which ones had quietly stopped being honest long before anybody noticed. If you would rather hear this from the man who paid for the failures than from somebody unboxing a new one, subscribe. That is the only time I will ask. 6 checks, in the order I run them: the mechanism and how the click is actually made, the range and where your real work sits inside it, the head and the ratchet, whether you need this tool at all or a different one, how it gets stored, and then the 6th. Get these wrong and the cost is not the wrench. The cost is the fastener, the part the fastener was holding and whatever that part was attached to. Check 1 is the mechanism, because everything else follows from it. There are 3 kinds of torque wrench a normal person will encounter, and they fail in completely different ways. A beam wrench is a bar with a pointer and a scale. There is nothing inside it. You pull, the bar flexes, the pointer stays put, and you read where it lands. It has no spring, no cam, no detent, nothing to wear out, and nothing to drift. It is the least pleasant to use, because you have to be able to see the scale while you pull, which under a vehicle is sometimes not possible at all. But a beam wrench that is not physically bent is telling you the truth on the day you buy it and on the day you retire. And it does that whether it costs $20 or $80. A click wrench is the one almost everybody owns. Inside there is a spring under compression and a cam or a ball detent that lets go when the load overcomes the spring. You dial the handle, which changes how hard that spring is compressed. And when you pull hard enough, the mechanism breaks over and you feel and hear the click. It is fast, you can use it blind, and it is the correct tool for almost all real work. It is also a spring, and springs do what springs do. A digital wrench puts a strain gauge in the beam and reads it electronically. Accurate, often very accurate, and it will tell you the number as you approach it instead of only at the end. It also has a battery, and it is a piece of electronics living in a toolbox in a shop where things get dropped and things get cold and things get oily. What you are looking at in the store is which of these 3 you are actually holding, because the packaging blurs it. Pick it up and find the scale. If it is a bar with a pointer, it is a beam. If the handle turns and there is a locking collar at the bottom, it is a click. If it has a screen, you know what it is. My rule after 40 years is that a click wrench is what you use and a beam wrench is what you keep to check the click wrench with. That pairing is worth more than either tool alone, and it costs less than one premium wrench. I put the whole buying logic for that pairing in the 40-year buy list, and it is linked in the description and the pinned comment. One more thing, while the tool is in your hand, look at where the scale actually is. On a click wrench, the scale is on the handle, and the handle turns, which means the numbers you are reading are moving parts. On some designs, the window is small, and the increments are tight enough that in poor light lying under a vehicle, you will misread it. That is not a manufacturing defect. It is a design choice about who the tool is for, and it is worth knowing before you own it rather than afterwards. Check 2 is range, and this is where the cheap tool wins outright. Every click wrench has a stated range, and its behavior is not the same across that range. The bottom of the range is where a click wrench is at its worst, because down there the spring is barely compressed and small variations matter proportionally more. The top of the range is where you are asking the mechanism for everything it has. The reliable part is the middle. So the actual question is not which wrench is most accurate. It is which wrench has your work sitting in the middle of its range. A lug nut and a valve cover bolt are not in the same universe, and no single wrench covers both well. If you are buying one wrench to do wheels, you want your figure comfortably inside the middle of that tool's span. If you are buying one wrench for engine work, you want a much smaller wrench, and using the big one at the very bottom of its scale is worse than useless because it feels authoritative while being wrong. Here is why this is the check where you should spend less. 2 wrenches with the same range, one at a budget price and one at 4 or 5 times that, are both going to be least trustworthy at the bottom of their scale. Paying more does not move that problem. It buys you a better feel and a better ratchet, which are real things, but it does not buy you honesty at the bottom of the range. Buying the correct size tool for the job is worth vastly more than buying the expensive version of the wrong size. If the choice in front of you is one premium wrench or 2 budget wrenches, that between them put your actual work in the middle of a range, take the 2. I made that call for the fleet more than once and never regretted it. There is a simple way to settle this in the aisle. Look up the figure for the job you actually intend to do before you leave the house. Then compare it against the span printed on the tool. If your number sits near either end of that span, put the tool down and find a different one. It is the single easiest mistake to avoid, and it is the one I saw made most often by people who had spent plenty of money. Check 3 is the head, and this is the one thing a premium wrench genuinely gives you. The ratchet head is a separate mechanism from the torque mechanism. It is the part with the teeth, the pawl, and the direction lever. It does not affect the accuracy of the click at all. What it affects is whether you can work and whether the tool survives the shop. Take a budget wrench and a premium one and turn the head with your fingers in the store. On a good head, the movement is even, and the engagement is immediate. And when you reverse the lever, it goes over with a definite action rather than a vague one. On a cheap head, you can usually feel the difference straight away. There is slop before it catches, and the return has a gritty quality. 2 things follow from that. First is swing arc. A head with more teeth needs less movement before it catches again. And in a wheel well or against a frame rail, the difference between needing a small movement and needing a large one is the difference between doing the job and not doing it. That is worth real money to somebody working every day and worth very little to somebody who does their own brakes twice a year. Second is what actually breaks. In a fleet shop, torque wrenches almost never came back to me with a worn-out spring. They came back with a failed ratchet head because a mechanic in a hurry used the torque wrench as a breaker bar to loosen a fastener. That is the single most common way these tools die, and it has nothing to do with torque at all. Snap-on built their name on ratchet mechanisms and on being able to hand a broken one to the man on the truck and get it dealt with. And that is a genuinely different value proposition to a tool you throw away. Whether it is worth the spread depends entirely on whether you are the shop eating the downtime or the person doing a job on a Saturday. There is a practical consequence to all this that is worth stating outright. If you buy a premium wrench, you have bought a better head, and a better head tempts you to use it as a ratchet. And using a torque wrench as a ratchet is exactly what kills them. The nicer the head feels, the more likely it is to be misused. I am not being clever. I watched it happen for 4 decades. The men who treated the torque wrench as a torque wrench and kept a separate breaker bar for loosening were the men whose wrenches were still on the bench years later. Check 4 is whether you should buy this tool at all. And quite often, the honest answer is no. If the reason you are standing in this aisle is that you want to do your own wheels correctly, a click wrench is the right buy, and you should get on with it. But there is a large group of people who are about to buy a torque wrench set in a case with a full range of drives because the set looks like the responsible purchase. For most of those people, it is the wrong buy. You will use one of them constantly and the others almost never. The ones you never use will sit at whatever setting the last person left them at, and you will have paid for 3 tools to get one. Buy the single wrench that covers the work you actually do. If your work is wheels, that is 1 drive size and 1 range, and you are done. If you later find yourself needing engine work, buy a small wrench then when you know what range you need, rather than guessing now. The other case for buying neither is if what you truly want is confidence rather than capability. A beam wrench and 10 minutes of patience will do wheels correctly and will still be correct in 10 years without a single thought from you. It is slower and it is more awkward. And for some people, it is genuinely the better tool. And nobody in a store will ever tell you that because there is not much money in it. There is one more version of buying neither that I want to put in front of you, because it is the one nobody says out loud. A great many people who buy a torque wrench never actually use it on the thing that matters. They buy it for wheels, and then when the moment comes, they are on a shoulder somewhere in the dark with a spare and no wrench at all. If that is honestly the scenario in your head, what you needed was not a torque wrench. What you needed was to know that a wheel changed by hand should be checked properly at the first opportunity, and to have somewhere to go and do that. Buying a tool that lives in a garage does not solve a problem that happens on a road. Check 5 is storage, and this is where most torque wrenches are quietly killed by their owners. A click wrench holds its setting with a spring under compression. Leave it dialed up and that spring stays loaded, permanently, sitting in a drawer between jobs. Springs that live under sustained load do not stay the same. They take a set. And when a spring takes a set, the load required to break the mechanism over is no longer the load printed on the handle. The tool still clicks. It clicks confidently. It is simply clicking at the wrong number and there is nothing in the sound to tell you. So the discipline is to wind it back down before it goes away, not to 0 on every design. And this matters, because on some wrenches, winding all the way to the bottom of the scale puts the mechanism into a state the maker did not intend. The instruction that comes with the tool will tell you where it wants to be stored, and it is usually at or near the lowest mark on the scale. Do that every time. It costs about 4 seconds. This is also the mechanism that generalizes past this tool, which is why I want you to have it plainly. Anything that holds a setting by compressing a spring will drift if you store it compressed. That is true of a torque wrench, and it is true of a great many other adjustable tools and fixtures. The wear happens while the tool is doing nothing at all. which is exactly why nobody connects the two. In a fleet shop, this was the war I never won. 60 men, 2 shifts, nobody's own tool. Wrenches went back in the drawer wherever the last man left them, and there was no way to police it. That is the real reason. Our expensive wrenches were not more honest than our cheap ones. And it is the reason I want you to hear the 6th check, which is what you do about all of this. There is a second storage failure that is less obvious and does just as much damage. A torque wrench that lives loose in a drawer with everything else is being knocked, every time that drawer opens and closes by whatever else is in there. The mechanism inside is not delicate exactly, but it is not indifferent either, and the accumulation of small impacts over years is real. This is what the case is for, not presentation and not resale. The case exists, so the tool is not being hit. The reason I am confident about this one is that I could see it in the fleet. Wrenches that lived in their cases and got wound down came back to me in usable condition after a long time. Wrenches that lived loose in a roll cab did not, and the difference between those two populations was far larger than the difference between the cheap brand and the expensive one. That is not an opinion about brands, it is what the work orders said. Check 6 is calibration, and it is the whole thing. Every check before this one was about buying. This one is about the fact that a torque wrench is not a tool you own, it is a tool you maintain, and almost nobody does. Here's the mechanism, stated plainly. A click wrench is a spring with a scale printed next to it. The scale was correct on the day the spring was calibrated. From that day forward, the spring is being compressed, released, stored, loaded, dropped, heated, cooled, and used. All of those move the relationship between the number on the handle and the load at the fastener. Nothing about that drift is visible. The tool does not get harder to turn. The scale does not fade. The click does not change its sound. The wrench goes on being confident and stops being correct, and it never tells you which one it is doing. That is the death trap, and it has nothing to do with price. A $30 wrench that has drifted and a $300 wrench that has drifted will both put you in the same place. The expensive one may hold its calibration longer, and that is a real advantage worth paying for if you use it daily. But the direction of travel is identical, and time does it to both. Now think about what drift actually does at the wheel. If the wrench clicks early, reading high when it is not, you stop pulling before the fastener is where it should be. That is the loose wheel. If it clicks late, you keep pulling past where you should have stopped, waiting for a click that is coming too late, and you stretch the stud past its yield point. A stud that has been yielded once looks completely normal. It is sitting there with most of its strength gone and no outward sign whatsoever, and it will let go later on a road with somebody driving. Both directions of drift end in the same place, and that is the honest answer to the question in the title. A $30 torque wrench is not a death trap. An unchecked torque wrench of any price is. So here is the 30-second check in the store, and then the one you do at home. In the store, take the wrench and run the adjustment from the bottom of the scale to the top and back down. It should move smoothly the whole way, with no gritty spot and no place where it suddenly gets easier or harder. Then set it somewhere in the middle and lock it, and try to turn the handle without releasing the lock. It should not move. A lock that does not hold is a wrench that will change its own setting in a toolbox. Then look at the scale itself and see whether the markings are cut into the metal or printed onto it. Printed markings on a tool that lives in oil and solvent is a decision somebody made about how long you were expected to keep it. At home, get a beam wrench. It has no spring, so it has nothing to drift, and it is the cheapest, honest reference a person can own. Once or twice a year, put a socket on a fastener that is not going anywhere. Set the click wrench to a figure well inside the middle of its range and pull until it clicks while watching the beam pointer. If the two agree closely, carry on. If they do not, you have learned the most important thing you can learn about that tool, and you have learned it in your own garage rather than on the interstate. That is the entire discipline, and it costs one cheap tool and about 10 minutes a year. I want to add one thing about frequency, because people hear the word calibration and assume it means sending the tool away and paying somebody. You can. And for a shop with liability, it is the correct answer. For an individual, it usually is not, because the cost of doing it properly repeatedly will exceed the cost of the tool fairly quickly. What matters far more than formal calibration is that you know whether the tool has changed. A tool that is slightly off and known to be slightly off is a usable tool. A tool that is perfect and unverified is a gamble you are taking without knowing you are taking it. That distinction is the whole point of the beam wrench sitting in the drawer. It is not there to be precise. It is there to be unchanging, so it can tell you when something else has changed. The 6 checks come down to one buying rule, and it generalizes well past this tool. Buy for the failure mode, not for the feature list. The mechanism tells you how it will die. The range tells you where it is honest. The head tells you whether it survives the shop. The size tells you whether you needed it. The storage tells you what you are doing to it while it sits. And the calibration tells you that none of the other 5 matter if you never check it. Go back to that van on the interstate. The wrench that set those nuts was the expensive one, and that was never the point. It had been dropped, it had been stored loaded, and nobody had ever put it next to anything honest to find out. The money was never the variable, attention was. And notice that 5 of those 6 cost nothing to check. Only one of them is about what you spend at the register. Tell me in the comments below which tool you want run through these same 6 checks next. And the one that comes up most is the one I do. That is how I pick these. Buying once is not really about spending more. It is about buying the thing whose failure you understand and then paying attention to it. That is most of what 40 years taught me, and it is a good deal less exciting than it sounds.